Well, thank you all for being here with us, and thank you all for also still being here with us. I know it's been a long day. I think, though, this is an incredibly important conversation, and I just want to jump right in, although I realize I say that while staying seated. And First Lady Eliza Reid, we talked so much. In fact, I was just reflecting on the challenges we have here in the United States, and we certainly heard, from Ai-jen and so many others today focused on the care economy, on kind of the unfinished business of women's rights, which is intimately connected to conversations about the care economy, given how overwhelmingly both women in the formal and informal care, or excuse me, people working in the formal and informal care economy are women, and how far we are to real gender parity here in this country and in so many countries. And yet in Iceland, you have not quite achieved gender parity and equity, but you've gotten quite close and are continuing to make progress. What can you share about what has worked from a policy perspective, kind of a private sector perspective, a cultural perspective, to bring Iceland to where it is today, which is truly almost gender parity and equity for women?
Thank you, and we emphasize that almost a lot, because although we top the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index, that doesn't mean we've achieved it. It just means we're a little farther along than some other countries, and I think it's important for us as well to remember that in Iceland. But you're right that I think, gender equality is not something that's just going to happen on its own accord, or certainly not fast enough for anyone's liking. And it is a combination, as you mentioned, of policy changes, of cultural changes, things in the private sector, public sector. And really, for the last decades, there has been a conscious movement across governments and everywhere in society to work towards greater equality. And those, policy-wise, those include things like parental leave that's paid for by the government, that is for both parents. So in heterosexual couples, fathers have to take paternity leave as well. Heavily subsidized childcare. We have quota regulations for the boards of publicly traded companies. We have a law that larger companies have to prove that they are doing equal pay for equal work. So there's a lot of different policies there as well. We have a lot of strong female role models. We have almost 50% women in parliament. It's the highest non-quota regulated representation in the world. But I think, and because of that, culturally we see that. We had a female president in 1980. We have a female bishop of the national church, head of our police force. And I think really one of the key things here is that in Iceland, we've sort of passed the tipping point of debating whether working towards greater equality is something important, but how we are going to get there. And we know that it's not a zero-sum game that is putting down one group at the expense of another, elevating one group. It's something that is going to benefit everybody, because the more gender equal societies we have, the longer living the populations are, the happier they are, the more prosperous they are for people of all genders. So this is something that is benefiting everyone in the country, not one group at the expense of another.
And people now believe that because they felt that in their own lives.
Right, exactly. You can see the results of this coming closer. Although I hasten to add, we are still persisting and have work to do. And as we see from the global pandemic, things can happen that can set you back if you don't keep your eyes on the prize.
Yeah, Legit, I actually think the First Lady provided a very good segue to the question I wanted to ask you, which is that while more than 50% of large employers cite kind of the absence of an affordable childcare ecosystem in this country as a barrier to hiring enough qualified people for open positions, we don't actually see real leadership yet in a coordinated, bold way from the private sector. And I know that at the Kellogg Foundation, which has now for decades been focused on policies and programs to better help kind of protect and promote child health and well-being, this is something you've thought a lot about. And so I'm just curious, what arguments are you finding are working to try to build the consensus that the First Lady spoke about that's now really emerged in Iceland, that this isn't just a women's issue, or it isn't just a kind of parent issue, or it isn't just I'm caring for an aging parent issue. It really is all of our issues, even if none of that is true for us in any given moment.
Yes, absolutely. I think, if anything, the pandemic helped us understand the concept of shared fate. And we are now responding to that, and I do see some hope in that space, but it took women to leave the child care sector, leaving 80,000 open jobs, not returning because of their lack of pay and benefits, which then allowed the corporate sector to understand that without child care, we don't have the productivity and the access to workers, which then allowed us to understand then what a worker pipeline looks like. And we can't, at a pandemic, create a pipeline that we should have been creating at early child care. And so as we now are looking at that cycle and understanding that we all have to benefit from an interconnected ecosystem of how you create a pipeline and spur the economic engine for this country, we're now actually seeing people working with this interconnectedness. And so the corporate sector is engaging in conversations and understanding that childcare is essential. And we're also understanding that a great childcare gives a child a great start for then entering an entrepreneurship or a workers' pipeline. And it all then provides for how we create the true care providers and the people who continue to build our ecosystem across the economy. So we're now seeing that, and we're excited by that. And we know that when people understand that thriving children are connected to working families, and working families must be part of equitable communities, that's how we build the interconnected workforce that allows our country and our nation to grow. And so that is the work that we're doing at the Kellogg Foundation.
And I wonder if I can ask you one quick follow-up. Eliza, do you see kind of that growing, not only awareness of the challenge, but kind of commitment to kind of building kind of the enlightened pathways, even if it has to be kind of articulated in that way for their own kind of, commercial understanding? Do you see that being more true in some parts of the country than other, or in some industries or size of employers? I'm just curious, kind of, are there similarities across kind of who you're seeing as finally stepping up to change their own kind of workplace policies, practices, benefits programs?
Yeah, and I do think it starts in a local space, and I can give Michigan as an example. What has come
Got a shout out from Michigan.
Yes, Michigan. There's great work happening across the nation, but in Michigan, for example, a new project has emerged, which is called the Tri-Share Initiative. And in the Tri-Share Initiative, 1/3 of child care is provided by the employer. 1/3 is provided by the state, and 1/3 by the family. This model is proving to be very successful and is addressing key issues around affordability, access to child care, and then availability of workers. And what we're seeing is the success of this is something that can be replicated then across the United States. So we're proving out models and beginning to think about where's the innovation in this, and how do we all step up and join in to make this work for everyone.
That's great. Jen, I know you've kind of described your mission as helping to build the missing infrastructure that so often is really kind of the challenge confronting kind of women and families broadly, that isn't so much what we can see, what doesn't exist yet. What does that mean in practice, and what are you most kind of enthusiastic about, is really being able to help kind of build a more robust, equitable care economy?
I mean, I think it's just, we talked about this before we went on stage, and you take such a structural approach to what you do, and so do we as investors. We're an early stage fund that really believes in building this missing infrastructure to support the overlooked needs of women and working families. And we feel like it's $1 trillion, we know actually, not feel, we feel it, but we also know that it's $1 trillion opportunity hiding in plain sight that should be invested in. And it includes the future of inclusive work, the booming care economy, and it includes the new wave of progress and financial health for families. COVID, I mean, I think this is really interesting. We felt that COVID basically made everything that was invisible visible, and it was never going to go back. And we had this thesis around investing in 3 key categories, which is care, career, and household consumer. And we said we had this thesis before COVID, and then post-COVID, we were drinking through a fire hose of opportunities. There were so many founders, startups, engineers, people coming out of the woodwork, people who maybe haven't even lived the problem, wanting to find solutions that we wanted to invest in. So structurally, we believe that we can stitch together these companies and build a new platform, a new infrastructure, so that all women and working families can thrive.
First Lady, I'm curious, kind of to go back to kind of what admittedly I embedded in my first question to you and that you then, picked up on, which is that you're not yet at gender parity. For those kind of on the outside looking in who think maybe Iceland is this sort of halcyon place where kind of women, have kind of full rights and inclusion and agency, what are actually the challenges that still exist and how are you building coalitions to tackle those?
It's a great question. I mean, there's a number of things. Number one, intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. You can't achieve gender equality when you have gender-based violence. And Iceland, has what we call the Nordic paradox, where in the Nordic countries we actually see higher reported rates of gender-based violence than in many other countries. And that, we don't know exactly why that is, but it's probably because of, more trust with the police to report things, less stigma to talk about it, and a broader definition of what constitutes intimate partner violence or gender-based violence. Having said all that, it's still there. And there aren't enough cases that actually go to trial and maybe arguably not enough support for victims. And so that's a huge area. 2 other areas I would say are to do with finance and investment. We are not seeing enough money being invested by women or into women-led organizations. And not enough women running publicly traded companies. I wrote a book a couple of years ago on gender equality in Iceland, and at the time when I wrote the book, there were more men called Arni running publicly traded companies in Iceland than there were women. Arni is a popular name in Iceland, but nevertheless. And that has changed since then, but it's still very slow. And the third thing that I would say that we need to work on a lot, and I experienced that myself because I'm originally from Canada and I'm an immigrant to Iceland, is being very intersectional in our approach and remembering as we work towards greater gender equality that is not for one group of people. We can't leave women of color, women of foreign origin, women with disabilities, trans women, queer women, or any other groups behind. We have to be working towards creating greater equality for everyone.
Jen, I'm curious how kind of what the First Lady spoke about also comes into your work, kind of, all of the different additional challenges, bluntly, that often women confront. I mean, when 1 in 3 women globally has suffered intimate partner violence, gender-based violence, when we know that in much of the world, when families have to make choices between whether to send a boy or a girl to school, they send the boy and keep the girl home. How do you think about that? How do your founders grapple with the additional challenges, but also then hopefully kind of the empathy as a superpower? And when they do really understand a challenge that they've lived, do you think that they're more likely to succeed because they're more likely to persist?
I'm not sure how to answer that question, to be honest. I think, I don't know. I maybe you want to rephrase that question for me.
I don't know. I think sometimes we think of all of our challenges as only burdens. And I think sometimes they teach us how to be more fierce problem solvers. I think Lejeune knows what I'm talking about. She's nodding a lot over there. And I think that when you're investing in women, it's important to recognize that it is often harder to be a woman, candidly, particularly when, even as the First Lady Eliza Reid was saying, even in Iceland, where so much progress has been made, there were more men named Arnie,
Yeah.
right? Or here in the United States, until recently, there were more men named John, James, or Robert on corporate boards than there were women.
Yeah.
And so just curious, because you talked about kind of that lived experience of COVID, a broader definition of just the lived experience of being a woman,
Yeah.
of being a caregiver.
I mean, I think it just goes a little bit back to the point, sorry, I want to pick up on, which is, I think when we think about where money is going or why we're investing in the space that we're investing in, a large part of that is thinking about how this is not niche. It's not just a woman's problem. This is everybody's problem. I think we know, 42 million Americans right now are taking care of people that are over the age of 50. Caregiving after retirement is the one reason why people leave their jobs. And when you leave your job, you leave wages on the table, and it's been estimated $522 billion of lost wages. I mean, this is real stuff. It's an economic problem, it's a labor market problem, so it goes beyond just this is a woman's problem. And I think that that's how we need to look at it if we're really gonna make change.
June, I'm curious, at the Kellogg Foundation, kind of how do you see other aspects of your work also intersecting here? Kind of other aspects of your work to better support child well-being also intersecting with helping kind of better support their parents or their grandparents or kind of the others in their lives who might be caring for them?
Yeah, it's all interconnected, and that's how we look at it. And so, when we are looking at any issue, we look at it from a lens of racial equity, community engagement, who's involved, and the leadership. And women can be in that leadership role and typically step up in ways that are action-oriented. And it's funny, we were talking about that earlier today, and I think about an example. So we know, for example, that disinvestment, particularly in communities of color, is palpable, right? And what we have been doing in our own community in Battle Creek is thinking about what would it look like if we were to just reinvest in comparable levels across the community, so create an equitable community. And we've done so. And by doing so, we actually invested $50 million in the public school system because it had been disinvested for decades. Immediately, we increased early childhood experiences. Our children in our community went from 15% ready for kindergarten to 50% ready for kindergarten in a very short time period. Our graduates are now identifying colleges that they're going to. The high school is now an academy, so you can actually major in healthcare or STEM or education in high school. What's happening is we're starting to see there's a woman who's the superintendent of public schools. There's a woman mayor, basically the city manager. There's myself leading the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And what you're seeing is when that leadership steps up and they're committed to changing things and having the courage to change things, results happen, and that's what we're tracking. And what we're proving is, we're not talking about exorbitance. We're talking about comparable, equitable solutions that communities can engage in that will create equitable outcomes for everyone in the community. And that's boldness that we're taking on.
LeJune, I guess because I have the microphone, I'm just going to talk about one of my pet peeves for a moment. One of my pet peeves is when we accept the language in budget discussions of, oh, well, we're cutting the costs for education. Like, no, you're not. You're cutting the investment in education. We're cutting the costs for early childhood. No, you're not. You're cutting the investment in early childhood. Or we're cutting the costs for supportive services for people on Medicare, people on Medicaid and Social Security with disabilities. No, you are cutting the investment in ensuring that everyone in your community can live a life with dignity and agency. And so I so strongly appreciate what you just shared.
And I would add, we're about to do it again, because if we allow the benefits that were provided during the pandemic to expire, like they will expire soon, the child tax credit at the end of the month, we're doing it once again. It proved that with the proper investment, we can close gaps that have been structurally there for decades, that now we see a path forward. And if we watch that disappear, we will also suffer the consequences of the gaps that we are currently trying to deal with, like underemployment and inability to hire, lack of child care, and then lack of preparedness for future thriving of children. We are seeing it, and hopefully this cycle won't repeat itself.
Well, I know we're running out of time, but I do want to ask both first Jen and then the First Lady for final thoughts, because I do think, while of course all of these issues are human issues, they also are ones that disproportionately affect women. And I do think we need to be centering women in tackling these challenges and in building sustainable solutions for all of us. And so, Jen, please, any final closing thoughts, and then to the First Lady.
I mean, sometimes I feel like both Eliza and I live in Scandinavian countries, so that we live a little bit in the future. So we can see things, worse weather, true. But we can see things that are, again, structurally sound in many ways. I think for me, when I think about what would make a really amazing outcome for all of this, it's one, I think, is that care is clearly, it's valued, it's seen, it's acknowledged in society. I think, going to your point, I think that government clearly plays a role where they see this as an economic need, not just a women's or mommy need. And another thing that needs to be addressed, by the way, is that working women, for example, are exceptionally anxious about, there was a New York Times study that was just done, a survey that was just done, that said 80% of women have high anxiety around trying to be perfect moms. And by the way, 70% of them are financially unsound. So we just are living with these and grappling with these issues, and maybe, hopefully, we get some structural solutions to it and investment into it to make it better.
I mean, I agree also with what Jen said there. And again, this advantage of being in the Nordic countries with that welfare state model where we pay very high taxes because we know that for those taxes, we get universal free healthcare, and our by law, we're not quite there. 2/3 of our preschool teachers are meant to have a university education and preschool education. Our midwives have to be university educated to be midwives, and there's a real investment, as you say, in care there. But maybe if there's one point that I hope to leave everybody here with, and I loved the point that you made in the panel earlier about this idea of being overwhelmed by inertia sometimes, in the sense, I think that's how you phrased it, that working towards things like gender equality seems so massive, and sometimes we think, well, maybe I'll vote for officials who will introduce policies, and it's very trickle down. And I think if we are not the policymakers ourselves, it's hard for us to think what we can do. And I really hope that through examples of Iceland and knowing amazing and wonderful women that we all know and that are in all of our communities, we can realize that we may not all individually change the world, but we can certainly all nudge things in the right direction. And we're certainly all role models. And we can all be doing incremental things, whether that is beyond policies, elevating the voices of other women and listening to other women and listening to any sort of marginalized voice, being polite to each other on the internet, imagine that. treating with each other with respect and dignity, and consuming arts and media and sports and culture in a more diverse way and with more diversity glasses on. And I think that if that's a message that I can leave for everybody, it's to think about what we can as individuals all do, because collectively it will make a difference.
Well, thank you to the First Lady, to Lejeune, and to Jen for doing more than just nudging us, but really for leading us in the right direction. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you.